Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all here this evening. After this morning's lesson, I was talking to a few people, and one of my really dear friends came up to me and said, your wife's saying that you could talk to a rock or speak to a rock. He goes, the reason why you can speak to a rock is because only a rock will sit and listen to you. And that's one of my better friends. So anyway, Becky Robinette came up and shared something with me before services, and she was saying that, when it comes down to carrying out the mission, that it can really get messy. And so I responded to what she said, and she goes, no, that's not what I was talking about. She goes, what I was talking about is that life can get, because I was telling her, I said, when we did We Care and our evangelism thrust that we did on that particular event, that we brought a lot of people in out of the world, and they brought a lot of, for lack of a better word, they brought a lot of baggage in their lives, and probably to a large extent, we weren't ready to handle some of the things that they came with because it was just beyond us and so forth. And in that terms, I said that was messy, and she goes, that's not what I'm talking about. I said, okay, what are you talking about? She goes, well, we get really busy with our lives, and we get really involved within the routine of life and so forth, and because we're so busy with life, we don't have time to stop, and to give up time, because it's a really valuable commodity, and to extend ourselves and take the time to keep our eyes wide open to reach out to those who may be lost. And she likened it to kind of like police officers to the police department and how they deal with crashes. And she was saying, as civilians, we can see a crash and drive right by a crash without stopping because we're going somewhere. We got a schedule to meet. We got business to do. Whereas for a police officer, they're trained to be first responders, and so they respond to that very thing there. And so I thought, Becky, that was a great way of looking at that, in that we have to make sure that our lives are not so cluttered up that we don't have time for people, because that's what the church is in the business of. We're in the business of people and souls because they're valuable to God, and they should be valuable to us. Which kind of brings me to talking to you just for a few moments about our seminar that's going to be conducted by Jim Corner. I've been traveling with Jim Corner to Africa since 1990, so I know him really well, and he is one of the most pure evangelists I've ever known in my life. Seriously. He's a really down-to-earth guy. There's no frills or anything about him. He's just a really normal, casual guy, but he loves people and he loves souls. And he does one of these seminars that we're going to do this next week. He does it almost every weekend somewhere in our country and so forth. So he's very busy at that. And I wanted him to come here. There's other men that we could have brought who have done just as good a job as Jim, but I wanted you to meet him because he is a dear person and he loves souls. And I think he's going to be able to communicate to us how we might become more involved in World Bible School. And that's going to happen Sunday or Saturday morning, beginning at 8 o'clock to 8:30 is going to be a continental breakfast. And then from 8:30 to about 9:15 will be his first session on World Bible School, and then we'll take a break, and then he'll do a second session, and we'll be getting you out of there by 10:15. And then Sunday morning, I would encourage you to obviously be here because he's going to talk to us about Connect. World Bible School is the means by which we might reach across the ocean to those who are lost in foreign countries and so forth. And of that list, it's numerable. There are many, many, many people who would like to do Bible studies with people, but we don't have enough people to do it. And so that's one way that we can evangelize. And so when we talk about carrying out the mission, that's something that you can do, is carry out the mission in that way. Connect is more locally oriented. And right now, it's not all that well known in our area and so forth. And so, but it's a means by which we are building a bridge to our community that allows them to come to us to study the Bible. They're interested, or they wouldn't put their name on there. And to be honest with you, we're not getting a ton of hits on that right now. Dave has kind of made a circle for us of that we can extend to in terms of our community and geography around us and so forth. But they don't know a lot about that, and so that's going to be a means by which we're probably going to try to, in the very near future, to start promoting and allowing people to come to us. And when that happens, we're going to need to have people ready to take them on to study the Bible with them, because they're going to be within our direct area. And so they are potential souls that could one day become Christians. And so Connect could become a very big deal for us as a congregation. So those two areas, and I just hope that you will really consider. I know that Saturday morning in 2 hours is really valuable. I love my Saturday mornings as well. It's one of my days off, up to about 6 o'clock in the evening. But I really love my time, but I just think it's a great way for us to figure out and learn how we might extend the mission to those who are lost. And as I said to you this morning, geography to Jesus doesn't exist. He doesn't care about geography. He doesn't care whether the souls are in Africa or India or in Canada or in the United States. He just doesn't care. And he doesn't care what race they are. He doesn't care whether they're black, white, or blue or green. He doesn't care. All he cares about is that he came to save souls, and we are his hands and feet. And so I just really want to encourage you to really consider being a part of this seminar that is going to be held this Saturday morning and then a Sunday. So if you looked in your sermon notes or in your bulletin, you probably saw that the lesson, or the title of my lesson this evening is, "But I thought that was the preacher's job." And you probably thought, okay, he's going to be talking to us about soul winning, and I'm not. That is one of my jobs, but it's your job as well. I'm going to talk to you about the need to take some stands in our world. So we're really going to switch gears quite a bit this evening. Here's a recipe that everyone should know. Frog legs a la high polloi. At this point, you're thinking, what are you talking about? What is this? Well, here's a recipe. Take one pot the size of America, pour in a rich diversity of people and cultures, stir gently, cook on a low heat, gradually raising the temperature by increasing godlessness in an unnoticeable increments for 3 to 4 generations, and voila, you have a whole society that has been boiled spiritually to death. Their consciences have been completely seared without even a whimper or a pain or protest. The trick, of course, is to increase the immorality so gradually that people never know or become aware of the rising danger, and in the end, no one takes a stand because we don't have a leg to stand on. And we don't know that there is a moral standard that people are to live by, and our country is one that is in danger of falling into that very thing. America is a great country, and we do great things, but it's also a great melting pot of the world, and within the border simmers a giant gumbo spice with every type of seasonings, and it's nearing a boiling point. The heat is dangerously high, and yet so few people are talking about it or taking a stand. Already millions are inured, if you will, to the searing presence of abortion. We hardly ever talk about that anymore. Millions of babies are aborted yearly. Pornography that is rampant, that no one even marks as being there. Injustice, sexual promiscuity, the LGBTQ and whatever letter they've come up with next is there. Violence is surrounding us. 22 people were shot to death in Chicago just last week. And it's all backed up by a U.S. Supreme Court and the First Amendment that we hold to. And we look at that, and as a result of that, we live in a world or a society that because of the multimedia, we taste and touch, and we handle things today that would have scalded our parents. They would have been shocked if my dad was alive and if my mom was sane enough to know exactly what was going on. They'd be shocked of some of the things that go on around us and that we see happening around us. And yet many people are heard to say, well, you know what? That doesn't bother me. That touches me. And in a sense, that's supposed to be progress. But it's not. What may surprise you is that the times in which we live were prophesied by the Apostle Paul over in 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter. We generally don't like to look at passages like that, but over in 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, and verse 1, Paul said these words, "But realize this, that in the last days, difficult times will come." So when are these last days? Well, the last days are the days that almost all New Testament writers regard to as the days that are between, Christ has come in the first century, and to the time when Jesus Christ is going to return back to the world. Those are the last days in which we live. In other words, we are living in the last days. To paraphrase what Paul said is that now that we are in the last days, he says, difficult times will come. This word difficult is an interesting word. The word difficult in the original language is the word kalepos. And it's a word that is filled with menace, with danger, with violence. It's that kind of a world. And he says, you live in the last days, and that world is going to be difficult for you because it's filled with danger. It's filled with malice. It's filled with a menace, with all kinds of things that the world has to offer. And as you read further on in this third chapter, he kind of lays out for you what those last days are going to look like. And so as you listen to it, just think, do these describe our days in a way? For men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasures rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power, and avoid such men as these. And then he talks about those are the kind of people that will try to enter into households within the church household and so forth and disrupt the things that are going on around this. And it's easily illustrated in one form or another wherever you get your news from, whether you get your news out of the internet, or whether you get your news out of the newspaper or on the evening news. They talk about all these things, and they don't talk about them in alarming kinds of ways. It's kind of like a sniff at it, and they talk a little bit about it, and then it goes away. And there was a time when that wasn't so. I mean, there was a time when we would have been shocked that 22 people were gunned down in Chicago. I mean, they would have turned out something. They would have done something about that, you know. But today we just look at it as just a part of the news, and what's the big deal? And you know, that's happened in Chicago. It didn't happen here in Meridian. So why are we all don't get worked up about that? Because that's in a bad part of the country, and we live in a good part of the country until it goes bump for us one day, which it could easily do so. And so, you know, Paul is giving us a warning of how we ought to be thinking about life. And so not to be melodramatic, but just, I mean, if I were just to spend a moment talking about the rising immoral temperature that you see in Hollywood alone, it's shocking that you wouldn't have seen 2 decades ago or 2 generations ago would have not existed in the film industry, where nudity and profanity and violence, it's just gratuitous, and it panders the base side of who we are. I thought about looking at a show. It was called, it was on Netflix, and it was called Last Chance U. And I thought, okay, what is that about, Last Chance U? It's a documentary of a football team in Indy, Kansas. It's a junior college, and what that team is about, it's about players who used to be D1 players. That is, D1 players are players who played for Florida State University or for Miami Hurricanes or for some big name teams, but for some reason they blew it and they got dropped off the team or kicked off the team, and now they're at Last Chance U and in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. And they're playing on a team there. And I thought, that sounds really interesting. What I should have looked at is, it says TV 14. And that should have been the end of it, but I looked at it and I watched it. And those guys, all they do is drop F-bombs everywhere. And I couldn't watch it. So I finally said, okay, that's it for that. But there was a time when that wouldn't even been thought about. I mean, it just would not had been there. One of the movies that was a hit movie that you thought, okay, it's going to have a run and people will be satiated and that thing will go away was 50 Shades of Grey. But they came out with 50 Shades of Grey, grayer. I don't know it, because it's about sexual deviancy is what it was about. And that becomes, it'll be interesting to see if they come out with a 3rd generation of that kind of a movie. Here are some other examples of how things have changed. Remember when pornography wasn't 2 clicks away on the internet? Do you remember when a woman could walk down the street at nighttime and would not be accosted? Do you remember when trusting in God was commended and now it's condemned? Remember when marriage vows were upheld and children were held as valuable and valued? Remember when punishment of a criminal was encouraged? When politicians were indeed servants of the people rather than servants of themselves? When our society functioned on a bedrock biblical absolutes instead of this slippery moral relativism that's about our world? The melting pot, I guess I'm telling you, is boiling over with adultery and child abuse and prejudice and crime and drug and abuse and poverty and homosexuality. And Paul says, here he says, evil men and impostors who will proceed from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. I'm just telling you there's an all-out front against what is good and what is right. And so what stands in the way of that? Okay, I don't know if the church can stop that, to be very honest with you, okay? But I know what we can do. I know we can stop it where we are in our living rooms and in our families and in our church family. We can stop it at least at these borders here, and that we can protect and take a stand. So I'm going to share with you a section of Scripture that generally when we read it, you think, that's the preacher's job. But I want you to know it's not just the preacher's job. It goes far beyond what the preacher's job really is about, because it's not the preacher's job. It's our responsibility as Christians to take a stand for our soul's sake, for our children's soul's sake, for our grandchildren's soul's sake, for our community's sake, and for our congregation's sake, that we need to take some stands about these things. So what are we to do? Well, listen to what Paul says in 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 1. I solemnly charge you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who is the judge of the living and the dead, and by his appearing and his kingdom, preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all great patience and instruction. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires, and will turn away their ears from the truth and will turn aside to myths. But you be sober in all things, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. And then he goes on to say, because I'm already being poured out as a drink offering and the time of my departure is at hand. I have taken my stand. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. And now, Timothy, you're in line. You're up to bat. But I would submit to you that these principles go far beyond just preachers. I think the principles go to us as Christians, where we need to take some... we need to look at things. Listen to what he says. I solemnly charge you in the presence of God, in Christ Jesus, who is the judge of the living and dead, by his appearance and his kingdom. And in fact, he says, I am telling you that I'm solemnly charging you need to listen up, is what he's saying to him. You need to listen up, and you need to recognize the world in which you live. Remember, he's just written to Timothy in chapter 3, and he's laid that stuff out for him. Here are difficult times that are coming in your day, Timothy. I'm telling you, those days have arrived in our day, in the 21st century, and that we need to be solemnly charged to listen up. And then he goes on, he says, solemnly charge you to preach the word. The word preach there comes from the word keruso. It means to make the proclamation or to proclaim. So Timothy obviously is told to proclaim the word. I'm saying to you that we as Christians, we need to proclaim the word. There was a time, I guess, in the brotherhood where, when I was a baby Christian, I was really new to the faith and I came to the church, and I remember being at this old church building in Richmond, Washington, and we'd have some incredible preachers come there that were super big name preachers back in that day, and of course I just thought they were regular guys and so forth. But they said of those guys that those guys were the kind of person that when you punched them or poked them like that, a Bible passage would come out of their mouth. Because they knew their Bibles, and they lived by their Bibles. And I'm saying that we need to be that way as well. We need to become people who are students of the Word, and that we make the Scriptures our standard of living. Notice he says, preach the Word in season and out of season. The Amplified Bible, it sheds a little bit of light on this idea of season and out of season. It says this, it says, by rendering it as whether the opportunity seems to be favorable or unfavorable, whether it is convenient or inconvenient, whether it is welcomed or unwelcomed. You need to be ready in season and out of season in difficult times like Paul has described in the 3rd chapter, because it's really easy to drift away from God's Word. Instead of raising our children according to godly principles, we can get swept away by the current relativistic values, if you will, that embrace the marketplace of today. Instead of seeking God's will and His Word, we can flow with the tide of opinion that is offered by others, that is offered by books, or friends, or teachers, or counselors, or maybe even preachers that soften the message. But the Bible, we know, the Bible is that which we are to know, and we are to practice it and hold it above everything else. Be ready in season and out of season is the first principle. Second principle is, he says, to be persistently alert, to be at hand, to have it in your mind. It's got to be there with you all the time. You know, I just mentioned that they said they used to preach, poke older preachers, and they would, you know, spit out book, chapter, and verse, and so forth, and that was great. But here's what I think is even more important than being able to do book, chapter, and verse in your mind. I think what is even better than that is that you take book, chapter, and verse, it becomes a part of your heart. You don't have to memorize. I mean, you don't have to have it all memorized. It's just got to go from your head to your heart, so that it becomes a part of your values, a part of your standard, part of the way you live your life in terms of how you think and what you say and what you do with your lives. And that's going to take a lot of mental discipline to keep our minds sharp. Third principle, tucked away in the commands, is reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and instruction. That means we just have to be ready, and then we have to take a stand. Yale University student, he's a great American theologian, quote theologian, it was Jonathan Edwards. He wrote this in his diary: resolved that all men should live for the glory of God. Resolve, second, that whether others do or not, I will. I thought that was really insightful for this man to write something of that kind of nature down there. Taking a stand. Why are we to do it? Well, there are many reasons I guess it could give you. Paul, he lays out two. He says, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. Who's the they that he's talking to? The they is us. The they is, he's talking about us-uns, we-uns. You know, you and me, that's the they that he is talking about. And he says, because there will come a time when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate to themselves teachers according to their own desires, and will turn away their ears from the truth and turn aside to myths. Notice that the apostle says the truth will be rejected willfully. It doesn't say that it will not be heard. They'll give a hearing to it. They will listen to it, but they will not endure it. Why is that? Because he says, because there are certain things they want to hear. And they want their ears tickled. They want to hear what they want to hear, not what needs to be told to them. Kind of like tonight, a little bit. I mean, you didn't come here planning on hearing a lesson like this, you know. And so I probably could have tickled your ears more if I had talked to you about heaven and love and all that good stuff, you know. But this is part of what the Scriptures, this is the part of the counsel of God that is there written for our warning for us to listen to. And so Paul says there's a warning here. They will not endure sound doctrine. They'll heap to themselves those who will tickle their ears. And so they search among the plethora of authors and teachers and counselors and preachers that are available today until they find someone who theologically or philosophically agrees enough with them that will accommodate their desires, and they become the hired ones. You guys have hired the wrong preacher if that's what you want out of me. I mean, I had an eldership one time say to me, they said, you know, Richard, you need to preach 20-minute sermons. I said, okay, I'll try that. I tried it for about 2 months. And I got down, so I was doing like 22 and 23-minute sermons, and I had an elders meeting. And I said, you guys need to accept my resignation because I'm done here. What? I said, I can't get it done in 20 minutes. It's either top heavy with information or it's top heavy with application, but there's no balance in there. You guys got the wrong preacher. I said, I'm not fussing at you. I'm just telling you guys got the wrong guy. If you want a Toastmaster speaker, go hire yourself a Toastmaster speaker. If you want a preacher, then I'm your guy. Because I'll tell you stuff that maybe you don't want to hear. That's kind of a soapbox of mine, so I'll get off of that. So we need to send. So how are we to do it? Paul says that he gives 4 concise injunctions that should characterize our efforts in taking a stand. He says, be sober in all things. Endure hardship. Do the work of an evangelist. Fulfill your ministry. That's verse 5. The first one is he says you need to be sober in all things, which means you got to stand calmly. You can't be stampeded by the world in which you live. The world can be really frightening and scary after I've shared with you all those things there, but we need to be sober. We need to be calm. We need to be clear-minded about who we are and about what our mission is about. Secondly, we need to endure hardship, which means we need to stand patiently. We need to just suck it up and maybe even get tough, but endure hardship. Thirdly, we're to diligently do the work of an evangelist. That word evangelist, that's that Greek word I was telling you, euangeles. Euangelion is the word for gospel. We carry the good news. That's my job. I know that. That's Clint's job. He knows that. But it's all of our job to be those who proclaim the good news. So Paul says to Timothy, be sober in all things, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist. That's a basic requirement of all believers, is that we hold to our faith and that we share our faith. And it's a good thing to share because it's good news. We don't have bad news for people. We have good news for people. People may not want to hear it, but we have good news for them that they can be saved by Christ. And finally, we're to fulfill our ministry, meaning that we are to do it thoroughly, that we are be committed to the work, that we heartily embrace it, and that we hold to it to the very end, that we're faithful all the way to the end of this life. And in doing so, we'll make an impact that's pure and practical. Being unique makes an impact. Being different in our world makes an impact. You're becoming more rare all the time, so being unique will make an impact. Number 2, being pure, it provides a model. It gives them something else to look at than Hollywood. You become a model of what purity and holiness is about. Being consistent, that keeps us stable. We know what we believe. We know what our standard is. We're able to be well-balanced and stable. And finally, being committed. It gives us determination. Next time you're feeling the pressure to give up, to give in, to get out because the melting pot is too hot, you might remember Winston Churchill's words. He said this, and here's a guy who knew what it meant to stand in difficult times. We look back on Winston Churchill and we think, man, what a great statesman he was in Great Britain during the Battle of Britain and when they were fighting off the Nazis and so forth. And we think, what a great statesman he was. Let me tell you what, that guy was not popular back then. I mean, he was not popular, but he knew who he was and he knew where the stand was. So he said these words, never give in. Never give in. Never, 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 never in nothing, great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. And those are words that we can live by. Never give up. Hang in there. No matter how difficult your world might become, you be the light. You be the salt of the earth. And God will bless us because we have chosen to do so. So the lesson is yours. I'm responsible for what I said. I'm responsible for how I went about saying it. But you'll be responsible for what you do with it. I hope you'll do good with it. And that it will encourage you to stand. Because you stand for a good cause. And you stand for a great God that's worthy of our admiration and worthy of our lives. The lesson is yours while together we stand and sing and give you opportunity.